Part of our mission statement, we focus on religious difference as an organization. And a lot of people in the interfaith space tend to want to go to sort of spaces of commonality. That's really important work. And we're not saying that our religions don't share beliefs, share practices, share principles amongst one another, even share stories, and sometimes share text. That's all really, really important work. But a lot of people view religious difference as something that's inherently violent or inherently combustible and something that we need to be afraid of. And so as a result, we either kind of move into this commonality space and then just stay there, or we avoid it altogether. We want people to acknowledge the common humanity, acknowledge the commonalities between the traditions, but to really go further and engage the differences and not be afraid. I would kind of go back to the foundings of our nation and the sort of commitment to religious diversity and religious pluralism that animated the ideals of our nation. And while they haven't been fully realized at any point, they're sort of a grounding or an anchor for us to always aspire to. And so when you think about that, how do we actually engage religious diversity? How do we affirm religious pluralism as a value, as something that we can learn from and have in society? You've got to actually build spaces where you can do this. Our religious institutions, understandably, are focused on themselves. They're focused on their own communities and their own congregations. A lot of our businesses, our schools, and the public square tend to be sort of religion-free zones or secular zones. And so when you're really trying to figure out how religious diversity works and where you can develop the skills and the capacities to think about that, to be interreligious, you actually have to build those spaces. Those spaces don't exist on their own. And we're lucky in Baltimore to have the ICJS. The larger field of interfaith and interreligious studies, I sort of roughly divide into two spheres. There's the interfaith doers, and then there's the interfaith dialoguers. And both are incredibly valuable. We as an organization fit solidly within the interfaith dialogue space, but I want to kind of talk about both. So interfaith doing, if you get a group of religious people together to go build a house or to go do a food drive, you're engaging in positive social action, and you're doing so across interfaith lines. It's really important and valuable work. The challenge to that is, well, how much do you actually know about the beliefs and practices of the person with which you just had the food drive? What's the sort of level of your relationship with that person or with that religious community? Interfaith dialoguing, on the other hand, is sort of focused on, well, let's study each other's traditions, let's engage each other's sacred texts, let's look at the questions that have animated the religious thinking for each tradition and try to really understand why we are doing certain things. And to really understand that there are differences there that we need to be able to engage positively and ask questions of our neighbors. And that's the space that we find ourselves in.
The power of the interreligious dialogue that we've had here is the opportunity for me to focus on the human first, before the faith background, before, the covering, before the Jesus piece, and actually being able to just talk with people and understand, where our foundations are. That's been really powerful.
The Imagining Justice in Baltimore initiative is actually an amazing place and a program where we're trying to experiment with the interfaith doers and the interfaith dialoguing work. We're trying to ask people, so what does it mean to do justice in the world? But we're asking the folks who are doing that work of justice, what does it mean to think interreligiously about the work that you're doing?
People of faith and people who utilize scripture in a meaningful way to affect their actions, that is a piece that I think that we could really use in today's world.
I feel like the opportunity to learn across traditions still really much, for me, very much so felt like instruction on living. And I think that's appropriate because I feel like we are here, or we were here, to kind of learn and apply.
This year, in Imagining Justice in Baltimore, we're talking about water justice, and it's the third time we've gathered a group of civic leaders and justice leader fellows. The initiative was originally born after the uprising and the death of Freddie Gray, when the ICJS was asking itself, well, what role does interreligious learning have to play in Baltimore at this moment? What are ways that we could bring interreligious knowledge to bear on the struggles of Baltimore? And so that's the sort of genesis of the initiative. Access to clean, safe drinking water is core to human existence, and it has been throughout all of human history. And that question is really alive in Baltimore today, but it's also alive in other cities in America and around the world. And so water justice as a topic seemed both timely and important. In particular, Baltimore, the infrastructure of supporting water in Baltimore is an issue that is going to keep coming up in the years ahead. Thinking about water bills in Baltimore is an issue. We also, as a staff, are mindful of the crisis in Flint, Michigan, and as a part of the fellowship program, had all of our Justice Leaders Fellows this year read the book, What the Eyes Don't See.
At the start of this fellowship, we were sent a book called What the Eyes Don't See, and it was chronicling a doctor's experience in Flint, Michigan, when it was revealed that there were all these issues with lead in the water. What has helped me with this water justice focus is being able to dig a little deeper and explore what we can't see.
Many of the people who were involved in the cohort were very actively involved with the fights for water justice in Baltimore, including issues like tenants' rights around water bills and such like that, and fair pricing in water, and just making sure that there's equity and distribution of resources. And so just seeing the number of people who not only talked about and were familiar with these issues, but were actively fighting this in a faith-based lens, and seeing that those faith groups that were fighting for water justice were often interfaith coalitions was really meaningful to me, and just to see people put their faith into action fighting for this justice around water.
Imagining justice in Baltimore is a specific type of interfaith dialogue. I kind of refer to it as shoulder-to-shoulder work. And so it's when you're looking at a common problem, in this case, water justice, and you're saying, well, what are the best ideas that come from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions about that topic? And so you're all standing shoulder to shoulder and looking at a topic together and drawing from the best of your traditions to address the topic or to problematize the topic in a really new and interesting way. And so that's the type of interfaith work that we're doing in this program.
What I was hoping to get from the experience, especially with respect to what I know about religious history and conflict and dialogue, was just an honest conversation. Very candid, transparent, honest opinions, very the vulnerability from other members about the dialogue.
I think that interfaith, interreligious dialogue is really important. For so many people, it does mean so much in their meaning making of what the world means to them, how they organize their values. It has a cultural significance for people, and it's part of who we all are, whether we choose to have a faith or not. It's something that as human beings is part of who we are, how we grapple with what the meaning of all of this that we're in.
All of our religious traditions call individuals to build just societies or just communities. That includes ethical traditions that are outside of religious traditions as well. And so I think as a society, we're all living together. We're one of the most religiously diverse societies in the world today and at any point in history. And if we're all trying to build a just community together, we need to draw on the resources that are available from the diverse religious and ethical traditions around us to really sort of name, well, what is justice? Who is my neighbor? What is water justice? How should we be stewards of this natural resource? How should this natural resource be given to people? And to really think through what those questions are, and to name those questions, and then to draw from diverse sources to think about the answers. At ICJS, we have a scholar staff. One of the things that scholars bring to interfaith dialogue, in particular, we can articulate what we believe as individuals, but we can also sort of map onto the history of ideas and the history of traditions what other people believe. And so as scholars, we're able to bring a variety of those resources that are both intra-religious, so internal to religious communities, as well as inter-religious, because we've been trained in that particular subject matter. Specifically, over the next couple of videos, you're going to be learning with ICJS scholars about how Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions can address the topic of water justice. The scholars are going to provide both sacred texts and also religious questions around this. They're going to provide you with context about the traditions. They're going to introduce terms that may be unfamiliar to you, but this is all in service of building an increased knowledge base for everyone who's participating in this program, and so that you can walk away with a better sense of how Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions can approach this topic, and also have a better sense of how religious traditions sort of think themselves internally about important matters. At the ICJS, we are trying to create a space for facilitated conversation. And so we recognize that you're going to be sitting down with strangers and having conversations about what matters to you and what you think about things. You're going to be asking questions. You're going to be vulnerable in a certain way. And that can bring with it a certain amount of fear or anxiety. And that's totally normal. Even if you've done it 100 times, coming into a new space with new people and talking about things that matter can be really, really hard. One of the things we sometimes do in our programs is talk about what we're afraid of walking into the space. So a lot of times people are afraid that they're not knowledgeable enough about their own religious tradition. And so a person may think, oh my gosh, I have to speak for all of Christianity or all of Islam or all of Judaism. Everybody in your group knows that you do not represent the entirety of that tradition, so rest assured that you can do this. You can contribute your voice and your perspective to the work. Another fear is that you are going to ask a question that may be offensive. I think we're all raised, I know I was, to try to be polite, to try to make people feel comfortable. We all want to be able to ask authentic questions and hear real answers. And so try to put that fear aside, that people know that you're coming at this with hopefully good intentions, and are able to ask meaningful questions about things that you don't know.
You know, what surprised me about the program was just how quickly people really wanted to be in connection, and the level of curiosity that was in the space, and the respect, and really seeing each of us as unique people worthy of dignity and honor. That really struck me, and I think that sort of paves the way for the possibilities for how we can bring cross-cultural dialogue, cross-religious dialogue to Baltimore.
Debate is something that we're really, we're trained to do in all of our educational institutions. I'm trying to prove my idea as superior to your idea, or to convince you to adopt my idea. Debate has its value and its place in society. What we're trying to do is to create habits of dialogue. And dialogue is not that I'm necessarily convinced by what you say, or I'm necessarily successful in convincing you to change. Dialogue is about achieving mutual understanding between people. One of the resources that we use in almost every program that we offer is a guide sheet called Debate versus Dialogue.
I listen to learn. I take seriously someone else's point of view. I listen to counter. I am closed to someone else's ideas.
I speak for myself. I use my own experiences and point of view. I try to examine my own assumptions. I speak for others. I assert my assumptions about others' experiences and motives in an effort to vindicate my point of view.
I ask questions to clarify and increase my understanding of someone's point of view. I try to suspend judgment and give my conversation partner a fair hearing. I ask questions to control the conversation or to confuse my conversation partner. I look for ways to affirm my point of view. My goal is to win the debate.
I allow my conversation partner to complete a thought. I wait until they are finished to respond. I interrupt my conversation partner or change the subject.
I listen for strengths so that I may affirm and learn someone's point of view. I listen for weaknesses so that I may discount and devalue someone's point of view.
I respect others' experiences as true and valid for them. I desire to learn from these experiences to come to new understandings of my own. I interpret others' experiences as naive, incorrect, or distorted, while championing my own.
I concentrate on others' words, feelings, body language, and other modes of communication. I concentrate on my response or my next point.
I use silence to my advantage.
I look for ways to extend the conversation. I look for ways to end the conversation.
When we talk about what success looks like at ICJS, I oftentimes use kind of a shorthand answer. It's when two people who strongly disagree about something, when one person can articulate the position of someone else in a way that she or he says, yes, that's what I mean. And that's not necessarily that you agree with that person, but you're able to articulate their position back to them in a way that's authentic to them and that they would say, yes, that's what I'm trying to tell you. And so that habits, the habits of dialogue, need to be cultivated in more spaces. And that's what we're trying to do in this program. So our goals for the first session are for the small groups to get to know one another and to begin using your religious voices. So what does it mean to talk as a religious individual and to use your interreligious ears? What does it mean to listen to someone else share their sacred story and to be able to both understand what they're saying and also maybe be a little confused by what they're saying and ask it an appropriate follow-up question? And so the activity that we're going to do is called Sharing Your Sacred Story. And because we're all in our homes, we think that this might be a wonderful opportunity to also share a sacred object if one is available to you. And so I have brought mine here today and will share my sacred story. The sacred story that I'm sharing with you today, I have 3 objects. These are the holy books from my uncle, Father Terence Michael Shelby, who hated the name Terence and so always went by Father Mike Shelby, who died in 2015. He was a priest in the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin for over 50 years. Every year, my mom and I would go up and visit my uncle in Wisconsin for a few weeks every summer. We spent a lot of time with him at his various residences. He has been a hospital chaplain who lived actually inside the hospital, and he'd also been a parish priest living in a rectory. Every day, my uncle would go off with the Liturgy of the Hours or the Divine Office to pray at regular intervals throughout the day and to have his sort of quiet time in prayer and in relationship with God. When he died in 2015, the family decided to share his sacred texts with me, and so I am the custodian of these texts and have had them now for 5 years. This top one is his daily missal, and it's got his name embroidered on the cover. This is the Divine Office for Ordinary Time, which is the sort of time we're in right now. And this is the Divine Office for Lent and the Easter season, and which is the season in the springtime leading up to the Easter celebration. I also have his Advent devotional as well, but that one is a little bit more ragged, and so I didn't bring it for our sharing today. My hope is one day to pray with these materials so that in some ways I can pray with my Uncle Mike and honor God through that. But I haven't been able to do that yet. As a man of God, he took prayer very, very seriously, and at different seasons in his life had sort of note cards and marginalia in all of his sacred texts. And so looking at them seems like a little bit of an invasion of privacy into his private life, into his spiritual life. I don't think he would have felt that way about me using them in that way, but I haven't quite gotten up the courage to really pray with these texts yet, but I hope to someday. And so right now, they live in my office, and they are a reminder of what it means to be a person committed to living a religious life in the world, and I hold them very dear, both as sacred texts and both as a sacred relationship. We're excited to have these conversations and just share this information with you. The long-term goal of Imagining Justice in Baltimore is to build capacity for interreligious learning and interreligious listening. We need to, as a society, equip ourselves to be able to speak out of our deepest beliefs and to speak out of our strongly held convictions in a way that makes sense to others. And we also need to be able to really listen to what people are saying and to try to achieve a deeper understanding of what animates individuals, particularly in the pursuit of justice. In the Imagining Justice in Baltimore initiative, what we're hoping you walk away with is increased interreligious knowledge and an increased networks in order to do real good in the world. And so we're hoping at the end of this series that you'll be inspired to take the knowledge, to take the questions, to take the reframings, and to take the challenge that these prophetic traditions are making and to realize that in your life.